Internet baby.
No matter how good I spin this to convince myself it wasn't paranormal, I fail. People who encountered ghosts in real life, what it was like. I was temporarily appointed to guard a sick prisoner in district headquarters hospital. I liked this duty, because it was just for 8 hours daily, while my usual is 12 straight hours, and secondly it was calm and nice. I just sit there on a bench in hospital ward, and read some old newspaper, or have a look-see at those nurses. Got nothing to complain about. Everything was fine and alright, except the very person I was guarding. The old patient. He was tall and thin, old and feeble. I don't know what was he diagnosed with, but he was just a skeleton underneath skin. Big bald head, eyes popped out the sockets, mouth wide open. It was a torture to witness him taking vaccines. No muscle at all on limbs or butt cheeks. He was indeed enduring the worst phase of his life. You'd never find him asleep. Strangely, I never felt that pity or sadness for him, which I usually would for others. He was something else. I used to think, well, looking at him, he's not here. He is not looking at this front wall but some other realm waiting for his acceptance or approval. He's damned and cursed. I know this sounds strange. There was something astoundingly creepy about him, I am telling you. Anyway, I used to sit beside this man for 8 hours from 4 p.m. till midnight. He would not move, or talk to anyone. He wouldn't feel anything, he wouldn't look around at all. Just a straight constant gaze on the front wall. It was my 4th day there. I was tired and filled with boredom, waiting for the next guard as clock was saying 12 a.m. There was complete silence and inactivity in the ward. To kill the boredom, I picked the magazine and tried reading it again. Barely few minutes passed, and I felt sudden discomfort of some sort. I raised my head and found that old man's head is turned towards me, and he's staring at me. I cannot explain the uneasiness it caused. Our distance was barely 3 feet as I was sitting on a bench right beside his bed. A straight and uninterrupted gaze like he's looking into my soul for a change. I gathered some courage and looked at him like we are into Who Blinks First challenge. I failed, of course. Soon my colleague appeared. I sincerely thanked God. We talked briefly, and I handed over my rifle and log register. Next thing, I was out of the hospital, took a cab, and went to home. It must be around 1 a.m. when I reached my neighborhood. From there I had to walk on foot as streets are too narrow for vehicles. It is a 10 minutes walk to home. It's a routine for me to come home really late at night. I was walking calmly on desolated streets, packing a .30 cal sidearm. I don't remember, but I must be thinking about my online activity for next few hours. I was single back then, and lived with my parents. Finally I reached the street, where my home is situated on the very end. What irritated me the most about the street was that nobody would turn on their outdoor bulbs except my mother, for me. It's a long and closed street, and without any light it gets really dark. So yeah, our neighbors were cheap that way. On the very end, a light bulb outside my home was lit. Whenever entering my street, I automatically get a little cautious, but calm down after finding nobody in the street. I heard of a few robbery incidents previously, so you can understand the reason. But that night, as I was entering, I saw somebody right in middle of street. I slowed down a little to observe. He was around 40 yards ahead, walking real slow, leaned heavily on the right side in a funny stance. He was in the darkness as the only lit bulb was on the end outside my door. He isn't a robber or thief. My mind told me. I never halted, but walked slowly towards him. It was just a matter of seconds for me to cross beside him, and get to look at him clearly. Suddenly something snapped inside me. Something started screaming so loud in my head for there's danger ahead. I am in danger. Who are you? I yelled loudly. And that's exactly when I was right upon him. I saw him. I saw his face. May Lord have mercy. That was the very same, very real, sick old prisoner I left in the hospital an hour ago. Leaned to the right side, wearing the same gown, barefoot. He was looking at me as I passed by him. He turned around slowly, and walked to me. I can't control the shiver even at this minute of writing. I did not run, but I walked super fast, and reached my home. Rang the bell furiously, and prayed to God that my father gets the door, as soon as he usually gets. I kept pressing the doorbell, while staring at that man approaching me, slowly. What is going to happen, if he comes near me? Should I shout or attack him? I cannot let this incident be an embarrassment for myself. Nobody should know I just got scared of something. Thankfully my father opened the door. Before going inside, I looked back. Nope, there was nobody in the street. My father went back to his room without noticing my sweater tremble. Maybe I did good calming down myself. I went to my room, changed uniform, and sat on a sofa. Thought about what just happened. This room has a door and window that opens towards the street as well. I did not see a ghost. No. How can this be possible? I remained silent and thinking of any legitimate reasoning that could defy this. Next thing I notice, somebody is in the street, right outside my window. I heard lamenting in low pitch. I heard footsteps. A ledge shiver ran through my spine. I am experiencing paranormal activity. There is a ghost outside my window. I didn't run to other room. I just sat there, leaned my head, and closed my eyes to concentrate on the words he was mumbling. I couldn't understand. But I can tell you. He was mourning, expressing his grief. And then it stopped. No sound of any kind. I could feel that nobody is outside my home now. And then it struck me. Why don't I call the goddamned hospital? I should talk to my colleague to ask how's our patient doing. I picked my mobile and, lo and behold, an SMS from same colleague had arrived half an hour ago, saying, Neiman, don't come for hospital duty tomorrow. Sick prisoner died shortly after you left. I am going home too. Let's take a day off, and we'll report back to police station together. No matter how good I spin this to convince myself it wasn't paranormal, I fail. Because I saw him. It was him, the sick prisoner. But I don't believe in ghosts. What do I make of it then? What seems the best explanation of all this according to my knowledge and beliefs? Readers may disagree. It wasn't a case of hallucination. I saw someone, not human. I am stressing. Who is capable of compassing a good trick as this? Who could carry such a tremendous sinister and negative energy, is supernatural, can adopt any shape or form, and can feel free to put out one hell of a show like this just for kicks and giggles? One being comes to mind. Jinn, the perfect conjurer. In 2000, our family moved to temporary housing in Vienna, Virginia. The home was owned by an elderly couple who spent their summers at their farm some miles away. They rented out their city home in the summer. It was a lazy summer with a lot of reading in bed in the afternoons. I repeatedly noticed what seemed to be a shadow of a man dressed in beige quietly floating down the hall. I never mentioned it to my family because, well, it was odd. A few months into our stay, our 8-year-old son said to me, Mom, when I'm reading in my room, I see a man dressed in a light color moving down the hall. I got the chills. I told him that I did too. We weren't fearful somehow. As we were preparing to move to our permanent home a month after that, my husband was packing up his musical equipment in the basement. When he turned around to leave the room, the boxes and guitar cases were blocking the doorway. He knew he wouldn't have placed them there. Towards the very end of our stay, we finally met the owners of the home. They told us that our son was sweet, and that they had had a son who was in the army, but was killed in an automobile accident, while in his 20s. I asked if he had been raised in the house, and they confirmed that he had. I told them about the sittings and blockage of exit and basement, and they smiled gently, and were pleased to hear about it. It was as if they'd seen their son after he died too. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10, at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day, while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find, and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide, and deep enough to swim around in, and had nice soft mossy banks on either side to rest on after we had tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads, and no mosquitoes, because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming we had to walk back home for lunch, but made plans to pack lunch the next day, so we could have a picnic on the creek banks, and spend the whole day there. The next morning we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before. So, being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderful, giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about a half hour of walking we came up on what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. Sink, toilet, and bathtub all sitting arranged together, and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking, and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home, or out of the woods, at least. I told her we should follow the sun, and eventually we would come up on a road or someone's property, where we could find help. She insisted on another way and we began yelling at each other out of fear, and, let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her, if she thought she was so right she should just go her way and we would see who got out first, so we split up. Now as an adult I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat, and also, an idiot. Worst possible thing we could have done. Not 10 minutes, after splitting up I began to hear someone walking maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slowed down, so she can catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was matched my pace. I slow down, it slows down. I stop, it stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth, on whether or not it was in my head, or there was really something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy, if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up on something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle, for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the setting sun west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log, and just screamed my little heart out while smacking my whoopah stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up, and booked as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have even seen in my life. In the middle it was so black it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sound of the bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud, I mean really booming out of this thing. When I realized this I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was no one would ever see me again, I would be gone. I did not want to run toward the thing chasing behind me either though, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing, and tripping every few feet for what seemed like another hour. Until I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough it did. I walked up over a hill about a mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I had ever been in my life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well, so hadn't told anybody I was lost, and my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in beat up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day I wonder how long they would have waited to come find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late. When I was about 13 my family bought this house in a quiet neighborhood in a small Texas town, 3BD 2BTH with a detached garage. My parents took the master and my brother, and I took the two smaller rooms. There was a door that shut off the hallway to the bedrooms from the living room. I took the bedroom closet to the bathroom at the end of the hall. Strange things would happen, but they weren't completely unexplainable. For instance, I had a long mirror I'd sit in front of, and get ready for school in my bedroom. One day I plugged in my blow dryer in, and it sparked and started to burn from the outlet. So it was strange, but nothing that couldn't be explained. I also took pictures, this was the 80s so before smartphones, in the room of me and my friends, and you could make out this kind of smoky face in a couple of the pictures, after we had them developed. We still didn't put two and two together. Once again developed film back then from one of those crappy little cameras tended to have imperfections. We chalk it up to imagination and bad development. Well, one night I was in bed and looking through my yearbook. I got sleepy and sat my yearbook on my desk that was against the wall at the foot of my bed. There was about a quarter of the yearbook hanging off the side of the desk. I turned off my lamp and went to sleep. I was awakened by the sound of my yearbook falling on the floor. And when I looked in that direction was a black figure. It was dark in the room, but not completely dark. Somehow, without seeing the black figure's face, I knew it was an older man. I also got a very evil vibe. And I knew without him saying that he didn't want me there. So my brother went to go to the bathroom, which is right by my bedroom, and he heard me crying. He and my mom were up late watching a movie. He went to my mom and asked what was wrong with me, because he'd heard me crying. Next thing I know, my mom opens my door and turns on the light, and poof, the man is gone. But the yearbook was on the floor close to the head of my bed, nowhere near the desk. She said I was so pale and my eyes were so big. I was crying this weird cry. She asks me what's wrong. I finally snap out of it and run into the living room. I refuse to ever go back into my bedroom. Fast forward a month later. I had friends over. I had told them about the ghost, so they wanted to come over with a Ouija board and do corny kid stuff in the haunted room. I showed them the pictures. My friend had just gotten a new car, so we went for a drive. We had the Ouija board and the pictures in the car with us. We had a very bad wreck. I had to go to the hospital. The car was totaled. The Ouija board and the pictures were destroyed. When I came home from the hospital, I was really out of it, and my parents put me in my bed in that room. I remember being pretty medicated, but I also remember hearing my bedroom door open and asking Mom, "Is it you?" and got no response. I fell back asleep from the medication. The next day I asked my mom if she had checked on me throughout the night, and she said she had checked on me when she woke up, but not in the middle of the night. I was on crutches, but I got out of that room and refused to go in it again. Shortly after, my parents put the house up for sale. The lady that bought the house happened to work at the same place my mom worked at. She asked my mom if anything strange had happened in the house when we lived there. The lady said there was a mean old man that was trying to scare her out of the house, but she had just bought it and wasn't going anywhere. Fairly certain one of my childhood homes was haunted. I've heard stories from my mother and father, and I've experienced some strange stuff in this house as well. My mother was on the phone with a friend or family when a hand grabbed her shoulder. Mom assumed it was Dad, so she looked behind her to where she thought he'd be. Nobody was there. My dad steps through a cold spot in the basement hallway. He said he has never experienced anything like it before. The basement was finished, so we spent a lot of time down there. This one day Dad was working in the basement. He walked down the basement hallway, and he stepped into and through an ice-cold pocket of air. One night my mother woke me. I was tired, so our conversation was a little dreamy. Mom asked me if I had been up walking around. I hadn't. My parents' bedroom was in the basement. After I told my mother that it wasn't me walking around the house, she looked at me and said, "If you ever need me, or Dad at night, I want you to knock on the floor." One day I was playing with toys in my room. Abruptly, my bedroom door started slamming, opening and closing, and the doorknob was turning. This lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then the door was still. I thought it was my mother who slammed the door opened and closed, so I stepped into the hallway to discover my mother wasn't there. She was at the other end of the house vacuuming the living room. Still, I asked Mom if she slammed the door. She had not. One night I'm laying in bed, and my brother walks across my bedroom and ducks onto the opposite side of my desk, where I can't see him. I keep my eyes open, and I watch that spot where he went behind my desk, and I wait for my little brother to come out. Only he doesn't. I become impatient, so I get out of bed and walk over to my desk, and I'm seriously troubled that my brother wasn't there. I had just saw him enter the room wearing nothing but his diaper. This was February 2nd, 2015. The pictures have the exact date on them, outside of Robbinsville, North Carolina in the mountains. My ex-girlfriend's father was renting a house on this land while he was building the house he is to retire in on top of the mountain. This land was part of the Trail of Tears, in which Native Americans were stripped of their land, families, and lives. We all can't imagine how sacred their lands are, to them. The first night we stayed there, we slept downstairs in the guest room. I had a feeling I had never experienced before, and still have yet to experience again. I hope I never do, the feeling that I was being watched. As my ex-girlfriend slept soundly next to me, I too was beginning to drift off, and then all of a sudden I felt something building up inside of me. I noticed it and ignored it, until it continued building. It got to the point where my breathing quickened, my heart rate went up, and I was terrified to open up my eyes. I was 21 at the time, large because I played college football, and do not get spooked easy, so I had no clue what was going on inside of me. I finally built up the courage to just open my eyes as fast as I could to confirm nobody was looking at me, and guess what? Nobody was, of course. It was just us two in this dark room. I felt so ridiculous and slightly embarrassed, and even now as I type this memory, haha. Anyway, I put on The Eagle, that ancient Roman Channing Tatum movie, and promptly fell asleep. The next morning around 7 a.m. I was at the kitchen sink, and I had an intense wave of nausea come over me, and I expelled the pre-breakfast stomach acid from my belly. Then I felt 100% fine. Okay, that was weird. Fast forward to the next morning at 7 a.m. again, same spot at the kitchen sink, I threw up again. Then felt 100% fine. Okay, that was weird. Everybody was asking if I was okay, and I'm like, guys, I'm completely fine. I have no idea why that happened 2 days in a row in the same spot, at the same time. I only throw up when I drink too much, and I've had no alcohol on this trip thus far. I do not have any acid reflux, GERD, or morning vomiting issues, so this was completely out of the norm. That's when the ghost stories began coming from my ex-girlfriend's father, a physician, not MD. The stories included having to lock their bedroom door at night due to footsteps on the stairs, seeing a huge shadow figure walking across the land over the trees, and the house phone ringing 3 times, 3 equals demon from all the horror movies I've seen, when it has been out of service for years, before they began renting. I thought he was joking, as he has never exhibited any beliefs in anything paranormal the whole 4.5 years I was with his daughter, so hearing these stories from him made me think, what are you talking about? Then he told us of the face of a woman on the tree outside on the land. He was actually really excited to show us the face. Why hasn't he ever mentioned any of this to his daughter before? We go outside to see the face in the tree, and of course I think it's going to be a natural discoloration in the bark or something, as I was certain there weren't any faces in any trees, haha. That's absurd. He takes us to the tree and guess what we see? Nothing. Okay, good practical joke, Mr. David. He showed true disappointment at the face not being there, and we forgot about it the rest of the trip. Until the last day. My ex-girlfriend and I were the last to leave the rental house in North Carolina to head back to Mississippi. As we were bringing the last of our luggage to the car, there's the face in the tree. It's a face of a woman. In the tree. I flip out. My ex-girlfriend is unimpressed, but I snapped a few pictures, which I will post. We called her father, and told him we saw the face. He responded with a victorious yes, and we left. My ghost encounter happened in this house with my cousin who lived just around the corner from where it was moved to, in the early 70s after many tragedies. We called it the haunted house. Don't tell my parents, but my cousin and I would smoke cigarettes inside the home with wallpaper straight from the 30s or 40s. It was clear it had not been lived in for a very, very long time. And the reason was a fire that had prevented us from getting upstairs to explore even further. But it wasn't just a fire that kept this home dormant for so many years. One day, we were having a smoke when all of a sudden a huge bang happened upstairs. It was almost like a piano dropping onto the floor from a considerable height. This scared the hell out of us, and we ran out the front door as fast as we could, never to return. There is no way that noise was just something falling over. It was a message to get the hell out of my home. Then just a year or so later, the entire front page and more of the local newspaper did a story on what really turned out to be a known haunted house. And sadly, it has a grim history of murder and suicide. At least 6 people lost their lives in this home. Very sad. When I experienced the home, it was surrounded by trees. So you don't get the full appreciation for how scary the setting was back in between these 2 locations. But a family is living in this home now and have fixed it up nicely. I can only hope they don't experience any of the scary things I know can go on there.